Hey guys, what's happening? So we're back for more Ultimate Wolverine, where in this one we see how the Maker tried to take something away from Logan, much like how he did Peter Parker and all the other heroes, but once again things have not gone as planned. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so going into this, we start out 30 years ago with Truett Hudson, who as we know in the main Marvel Universe became an advisor to the US Army, operating under the name of Professor Thornton, where during the closing days of World War II in the main Marvel Universe, Thornton, or just the Professor, as the soldiers like to call him, discovered a Nazi lab that belonged to Nathaniel Essex, which led to him finding Nathaniel's journal, which would change his work forever, because this led to the Professor learning about a number of individuals with very unique abilities, and these would be individuals like Charles Xavier, Eric Lensher, Namor McKenzie, and James Howlett, who he would later go on to call mutants. But long story short, we saw his attention gravitate towards James Howlett heavily. And I mean, he was basically stalking the guy, with him believing Howlett was the perfect candidate, because after years of toiling on the early Weapons Plus programs, Professor Thornton had been put in charge of the 10th, which would then be called the Weapon X program. But in this universe, on Earth 6160, we find Professor Thornton 30 years ago, which places this moment like in the mid-1990s, but even with things playing out differently here and coming together much later, you can tell that things are heading in the direction of Weapon X, because right now where we find Professor Thornton, he's tape recording notes on his weapons project, which has been postponed multiple times pending further analysis, and you can tell he's in a spot where the government's holding funds and pushing his project back because he hasn't been able to show them any substantial breakthroughs. But as he's recording, he says here, still our initial findings have yielded results that may be useful. Through our first adamantium-infused subject, Weapon Alpha, died within minutes of the procedure. And because this is taking place in the North American region, I don't think it would be too far off to assume that Weapon Alpha was his half-brother, James Hudson. And I mean, if that was the case, it'd be really messed up, regardless of how you look at it. But he goes on to say here, my small but devoted staff and I have discovered a remarkable number of individuals with abilities beyond our own living among us in secret. Mutants, so-called. The rumored Homo superior, and as he goes on to say, our potential subjects. The pictures were shown are that of Logan, and for the other three, I believe are Maverick, Sabretooth, and Wraith. Because I mean, they're not exactly labeled or anything like that, but I mean, the first one's definitely Wolverine. But this basically shows us that these potential subjects are basically the members of Team X from Earth 616. So in this world, Professor Thornton, who's considering these individuals at this time, he's basically on the brink of making this happen. Because in this recording, he goes on to say, some of these individuals have the ability to heal themselves, others a supernaturally heightened agility. We do not know their full potential, with the pending approval from the Department of, and that's when the Maker steps in. And again, this is 30 years ago, so it's about 1995 or something. So around this time, the Maker's still making his rounds and changing history the way he sees fit. So Professor Thornton, he's like Deborah Cox. He's like, how did you get here? Nobody's supposed to be here. Even though that song wouldn't come out for another 3 years. And the Maker tells him here, I am a simple man in search of a better world. So the Professor responds saying, there is no such thing as a perfect world, only for the Maker to tell him, a better world, Professor. Better. And that's when the Professor's just like, I never seen you before, what's your clearance? As he makes his way to his desk to reach for a firearm, only for the Maker to hit him with the T-1000 foster parent treatment, because he just kills the Professor right here on the spot. And just after this, the Maker goes on to say, you see, Professor, I am making this a better world, and a better world is one that you're not in. Just before he burns this entire building down to the ground. And it's just like, man, the Maker didn't try to persuade this guy or force him to work for him, none of that. But aside from this, we know that the Maker has been in control of the US government since at least 1963. So any resources that Professor Thornton might have had, the Maker also has access to. But aside from this, I also want to point out what we saw in Ultimate Universe 1 year in, when we got the audio dictation logs of Dr. Alonia Prostovic, back when she talked about how the Maker was handling mutants. When at the time she said, the task was handed down to us from the Maker himself. The Eurasian Republic was to be centralized home to mutant kind, though its primary motive was to control, and who better to control the mutant problem than mutants themselves. What the Maker did not know, however, was what the Eurasian Republic chose to do with those mutants. It was not to provide them with sanctuary, nor was it to imprison them. Despite their genetic similarities, they were not viewed as brother and sister, but as tools. Their unique abilities made them, shall we say, useful, which at the time went on to show us how Logan was discovered by the Eurasian Republic and how Directorate X was formed by the leaders of this territory, Colossus, Magic, and Omega Red, who didn't trust the peace that the Maker established between the different territories, which is why they took it upon themselves to make Directorate X and have everyone here operate as bureaucratic phantoms, which is why they have Ultimate Wolverine as their Winter Soldier, with a lot of the focus currently being on taking out the opposition, which is like your covert group of both mutants and humans who want to free all of the mutants who've been controlled and experimented on by the Eurasian Republic. And this is just one of 2 places in the world for all known mutant activity, because like we've seen in our coverage of Ultimate X-Men, which takes place in Japan, now that story is pointing things back to the Maker's Council, it's all starting to come together. And it's not exactly lining up with how the Maker had planned for mutants to be managed in either territory. And we talk more about that in the Ultimate X-Men videos. But in the here and now, as this takes us over into the present day, for a brief moment we pick up with a group of soldiers who are out here tracking someone in the snow, and as they continue to make their way through this wooded area, one of these dudes sees something in the trees, and before you know it, this dude gets picked off by the Winter Soldier. And we'll find out more about what exactly is happening here in just a moment. But before we do, first we head over to a meeting between Dr. Alonia and the leaders of the Eurasian Republic. And at this point, the doctor's basically explaining herself because the leaders have their suspicions on whether or not the Winter Soldier is fully under their control. And it's like with them using telepathy as a method of controlling the Winter Soldier, Magic mentions here how they're not the only ones with telepaths. And she even puts out there the idea of having them terminated. And this causes a bit of confusion for the doctor as far as why they're having this discussion. Because at this point, the Winter Soldier's been on 4 missions and all 4 have been successful. So the doctor's like, hey, I don't even know why I'm defending myself. And that's when Magic hits her with the, oh, you thought I didn't know. And that's when she takes all of them over to the lab where Logan's being held, because there's a growing concern with Logan having nightmares that he's possibly remembering his past or perhaps growing unconscious for some of the things that he's done. And back at the end of issue 1, we caught a glimpse of this possibly starting already, because just after he killed Kurt and Raven, he took a sniff of the blood that was on him just before he went on to remember Psalms 23 in its entirety, which was the scripture that Kurt was reciting just before he confronted Logan and Logan killed him. And right now, when Magic brings all of them here to the lab where Logan's at, they get here right in the middle of Logan having another nightmare. So the doctor, who's a bit disoriented from their means of travel, she quickly tries to gather herself and explain how this is normal behavior and how while he's resting and regenerating, it's normal for him to have dreams. And that's where Colossus just tells her to let him out so he can examine the specimen himself. So the doctor tells him that she doesn't think that's such a good idea. And throughout this, you'll see her refer to any of the 3 of these guys as leader. But right here, Colossus just snatches her up and he tells her, do not underestimate how disposable you are, doctor. Remove the specimen now. So that's precisely what she does, quick, fast, and in a hurry. And when Logan steps out of the containment, she tells Colossus that his vitals are reading normal, and she advises that he uses verbal commands or otherwise he may react poorly. And that's when he tells Dr. Prestovich, do not dictate how I may interact with my own property. I know how to handle creatures like this. It's not with verbal commands. Creatures like this, men like this, they know violence, they respect it. Because unlike you, men like this know there's no such thing as safe. Every second of existence, there is someone or something trying to take from you. And men like this, they know that men like me stand in their way. If you don't crush them, if you don't show them your power, your true power, they will resist. It is inevitable, Doctor. After all, he has done so before, so we will reinforce the lesson. The Winter Soldier's rightful place is under our heel. And after saying that, Colossus just tosses him off to the side. And he goes on to say, I think we should see this Winter Soldier in action. No more reports, we want to see. And right there, he's just like Ileana, Arcady, and the 2 of them, both Magic and Omega Red, they agree. And with how this is done, it's pretty interesting because Colossus tells the doctor that they're basically going to do this field test where they'll send 10 soldiers after the Winter Soldier. And depending on how he does, not only will that determine what they do with him, but the doctor as well. So just before they leave, Colossus asks the doctor if she understands. So she tells him yes, and right after that, she says, come Winter Soldier, you have a new mission ahead of you. And this whole time, even though Logan's been very compliant, it almost seems like he understands that he knows that he needs to do well in this field test or whatever for the sake of Dr. Prestovich's safety. And this is what takes us back to the attack that we saw earlier. And the messed up thing is these guys don't even know what took out they mans. And at first they think it's the opposition. But one of these guys got a look and he's like, nah, it ain't look like the opposition. But that alone just lets us know that the Eurasian leaders just sent these guys out here to test the Winter Soldier without any of them having the slightest clue of what they're getting into. And on one hand, that might have taken some time to actually do, since only a few higher ups know about the Winter Soldier, and outside of that a handful of soldiers who may have gone on missions with him. But for the most part, to the rest of these guys, the Winter Soldier is a myth. And that's why when we see 9 of these guys left, they're out here just sharing theories of what it might be. And one of these guys is like, my babushka told me stories when I was little of a creature in the woods, Leshy, the forest spirit. To where another guy's like, nah, I saw it running on all fours like an animal. And another one jumps in like, nah, like a demon. Until finally one of these dudes is like, it's no monster, it's no demon or forest spirit, it's the Winter Soldier. And this other dude is like, oh, that's a myth. And it's like, bro, after all these guesses, after people saying it's a monster, it's a forest spirit, it's a demon, you got the audacity to hear Winter Soldier and be like, oh no, that's a myth. But eventually among these guys, we find out that there's others here that have a bit more sense. And they end up piecing this together, because for them there have been rumors and whispers of the Winter Soldier. So he basically is a myth, but according to these rumors, he's supposed to be on their side. So with them more or less going over this logic, only for them to then see that there's cameras observing this whole thing, and that's when it starts to click. And they're like, okay, it's practice. And I mean, right there is like, not quite, but you're getting warmer. But they do come around to figuring out that it's a hunt that's being observed or monitored. But they never quite figure out if they're hunting him or if he's hunting them. And it's right here where Ultimate Wolverine, the Winter Soldier, steps out. And there's really this vibe of like, it doesn't matter who's hunting who, because this ends the same way, either way. And it's right here when the Winter Soldier pops his claws, where a whole lot of ammunition gets wasted. And you know, it's like when I see this, I be thinking like, man, it's kind of messed up for these guys. And it makes me wonder if when they signed up for this job, did anyone tell them that their deaths may be recorded for quality assurance? Because I don't know, man, it just seems like a really terrible way to go. Like at work, on the clock. Like, it's crazy. But following this, the Winter Soldier takes all of their heads and he walks up to one of the cameras. And it's right here where he looks straight into it and he poses for the thumbnail just before taking the camera out. And just after this, we see that the leaders of the Eurasian Republic are satisfied with the Winter Soldier's performance and compliance. But I can't help but to think that the Doctor is celebrating this for different reasons. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.